Hey, Christina here. Welcome to my crystal art series. Today I'm going to be sharing the design process behind Obsidian Golden Shields. Let's go. So here's my mood board behind this piece. Overall inspiration was definitely the Grand Canyon and looking at the Grand Canyon in different viewpoints. So I like to look at things from a bird's eye view because there's interesting shapes and things can be really simplified from a distance and they have a unique flow to them. So you can see here that I have a little bit of different views of the canyon as well as a map and a bird's eye view of pathways on a satellite view because it gives you a very interesting look and feel from afar and a pattern almost, which is very unique. I also looked at obsidian and picking up its textures and what its characteristics are. And it's very rich in black, super rich. There are some pigments in there of gold. It's sort of rare, but I've seen it on some inspiration that I looked at. And it also has a very subtle line detail to it, where it's vertical lines that run down the stone. I also explored some rock textures via volcanic rock, as well as rocks around the canyon area and rocks in general. I was also inspired by the smooth contours of the cliffs in the canyons. And then I wanted to bring in some of those characteristics that obsidian has, and those are the interesting line works that it carries. It has a lot of metallics within the stone as well, so I was also looking at metallics and what kind of colors I wanted to incorporate into the piece. And I wanted to keep everything dark tones because that's what obsidian is known for. It's rich black. And then I also wanted to bring in a calligraphy brush. So all the line work that I've done on the artwork has been inspired by a calligraphy brush using thick to thin lines and keeping things very organic. I also looked at rays of light. It really stimulates the characteristics that obsidian has, so I wanted to incorporate that in some way to make it expressive, but also draw in some focal point in regards to directing your eye to the focal point. So first thing first, I wanted to plan the layout out to see how I was going to lay out the shapes. And I started in with the line work, keeping everything loose using the monoline brush tool, which is default to Procreate. I added in the base colors next, focusing on the neutral colors, so your grays, your blacks, your browns, and then I added in an accent color, which was gold. But for the black, I did not want to use a flat black. I wanted to use a warm black, but then a cool gray to bring in a little bit of a contrast with that gold. And then bringing in some of those characteristics that obsidian has and noticing that gold pigment, I wanted to over-exaggerate the actual color because the pigments in obsidian are really flaky. They're not really clear. It's just something that you would see as a shimmer. So I just exaggerated it for this piece to bring some interest. I also played with positive and negative space to get the eye moving around the piece. And I just did that by bringing in some of that white space, but then integrating it within the actual artwork. Instead of having the white space just at the top or at the bottom, I have it within the piece. So everything has movement. I also added in texture that mimicked the rocky canyon and the pigment texture within the stone. So I'm just going to name off the brushes that I've used for this piece. So the first brush that I used in the first section And the third section is called Burnt Tree, and it was from the Charcoals library in Procreate. And this brush had that really rough, grungy texture that I wanted to use for the overall look and feel for the rock. And then the second brush I used was the clay brush in the organic library, and that was for section 2. So that's the middle island in the actual artwork. And then the third brush I used was the studio pen brush in inking library. And this was for all the expressive line work, mainly the really thick line that goes right across the painting. And then for those rays of light almost at the bottom of the painting, I used the monoline brush from the inking library. And this was just structure, that's all. It wasn't anything super expressive. It was just directing your eye to that focal point, which the focal point is the gold island in the middle. So I wanted to draw your eye to that, as well as the positive and negative space playing around that focal point. So the textures that I used also draw to the focal point as well, because I wanted to bring more of a intense texture to the middle island there, whereas the top and bottom sections have a more softer texture. And that was just to really draw your eye in. I also wanted to use tension to really focus in on that island in the middle. So I have the top section and the bottom section hugging the actual island, so everything's kind of surrounding that piece. And I wanted to just draw that in and bring it close together so that you are easily being drawn into the middle. And again, I told you about the rays of light. So the rays of light are directing your eye right to that focal point. So that was just some knowledge behind focal points and how important they are when it comes to actual art pieces. The thick and thin lines, I use them just for expression and bringing in some visual interest and variety. So that's why I use the thicker line for the middle and to bring some weight, as well as the thin lines at the bottom to really bring in that contrast and dimension. So once I finished everything in Procreate, I moved into Illustrator and I made an artboard that was 8.5 by 11 inches, and I made 2 boxes that were 4 by 6. I put them side to side and I found its center, and I merged the 2 shapes together using the Pathfinder tool. I began to do crop marks around each edge of the rectangle, and this was going to showcase where I'll be cutting when the card is lying flat, and anything beyond those crop marks will be cut off, so that's called a bleed. Now, next was to place the image on the right side of the card, because that was going to be the front of the card, and on the left I'm going to be placing my logo on the back, as well as information about the card, and that's the back of the card. And then after that, once I laid out everything, I removed the large rectangle, because the crop marks kind of replaced that now. We don't need that. And then after that, I save it as a PDF. And then I moved to my drafting table. So we are ready to score. I'm using my blue score tool, and I am scoring the page. So marking the top of where I'm going to actually score, and I flip it over, and then I run the score tool all the way down the page to create a folding indent. And once I'm done, I then move on to my cutting, and I bring out my cutting board and I use my X-Acto knife to cut down to actual size. So I line up my ruler to those crop marks that I made and cut it down to size. We're done. And then I use my bone tool to fold the card up neatly and to clean up that beautiful edge when it's folded. And pretty much that's it for scoring and cutting. Now the next thing I wanted to do was to bring in some interest. Alright, so I wanted to bring in some interest, so I took some old wrapping paper and tracing paper, and I picked a certain area on the piece that I wanted to draw more interest to. So I traced out the shape, and I cut it out using Mod Podge. I glued it down to the card by just using my little brush, and I added in that little taste of foil, which made it really rich looking and really nice finish in the end. And then to just finesse it a little bit, I brought in my gold paint and just to add a little bit of life to it along with the foiling, but kept it very subtle because I didn't want to take away from the actual foiling that was placed on this card. I just wanted to put some little tasteful things around the artwork, and I thought that really dressed it up nicely. So here's the final piece. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to my process. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you guys stick around for more of my future videos. Have a good day, guys. Bye.